Hi and welcome to today's episode in which we make 3 delicious vegan sweet treats that are easy to put together and seasonally appropriate. My creativity is a bit low/blocked at the moment. And I was writing a Patreon post the other day and I was kind of saying I didn't know what to make. I had on a YouTube music playlist of Autumn Feel, and as I was typing I suddenly thought, oh, maybe I could make some little Halloween trick or treat treats that would be nice and easy to put together, but also yummy for the rest of the year as well. I'm going to have a go at making 3 different treats. So there'll be salted caramel popcorn, some pumpkin spice crinkle cookies. Then I need to make granola for myself, so I'm going to have a go at making some granola with applesauce, and then I'll take some of the granola and mix it with chocolate, make some little cluster type things. So all very nice and easy. I've got a small apple tree in the garden and it's gone absolutely gangbusters this year. It's been covered. So I've been trying to think of ways to use them up. But these are the apples it produces. So they're very small, very tasty. The only problem is because they're so small, it's a bit of a pain trying to use them in a recipe and eating them because, well, you know, half of it is core. In the past, I've used them to make apple butter. I'll stick some links down in the description for you. Works really well. I'll start with the cookies first because the dough needs half an hour in the fridge to chill. Once that's in, then I'll do the granola, and then once both of them have baked, that's when I'll do the caramel, because the oven needs to be really low. I've adapted a cookie recipe that I found on Good Housekeeping. I'll link to the original in the description. I guess it's like a red velvet kind of flavour. I don't have any red food colouring, so I thought rather than make something that's lacking, I'll just turn it into something else and make it a recipe in its own right. I'm going to start with a 1.5 cups of flour, just plain all-purpose flour. That's 191 grams. Half a teaspoon of salt. Teaspoon of baking powder. In my dish here I've got the spice blend that I made up earlier. I'll do a teaspoon of that, and then I might taste it once everything's in and see if it needs any more. Feel free to buy a jar of mixed spices. You could use gingerbread spice, anything you like in here. So we will sieve that together. Give that a bit of a whisk just to make sure everything's well combined. And then in my separate bowl here, I've got 56 grams of vegan butter here, 4 tablespoons, room temperature you want it. The house is really cold, so there was no way it was going to soften on its own. So I tried to do the microwave trick, but it's gone too soft. And this is the second time I've tried to do it, so it's just going to have to do. This is 1.25 cups of sugar. This darker one here is coconut sugar, and this is golden castor. I'm going to give it a sieve because it is quite lumpy. So that is 190 grams. In this little bowl here, I've got a flax mixture, just like an egg substitute. So this was 2 tablespoons of ground golden flax seeds and 5 tablespoons of boiling water. And then you just mix it together, leave it alone, and it'll go nice and gloopy. So that's gonna act as a binder. Mix that in. 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract. You can just do 1. I bought a second bottle without realising I already had one. Got tons. Just before I forget, this is the coconut sugar. So it's dehydrated coconut blossom nectar. Whisk that together. I'm gonna check what the spice is like at this stage, see if I want anything else. I'll do another teaspoon of the mixed spice. That might be too much, but I can't really taste it. To the wet mixture, I'm gonna add in 2 tablespoons of ground almonds. And then I'm gonna add the flour mixture into there. Do a couple spoonfuls at a time and then mix it. Because I'm adapting someone else's recipe and it wasn't a vegan recipe, there's no guarantee this is gonna work, but this is how we find out. That's all mixed together. Looking very fudgy and delicious. I'm gonna cover this with a bit of cling film. It's now on to making the applesauce granola. I'm using the same proportions that I've used before for making the granola 2 ways, protein shake granola, protein shake cereal bars, and the savoury cereal bars. Having never made this before, I don't know if it's even going to work. I think it should be all right. This is the applesauce that I'm going to use. I'm going to set up my baking pan with a bit of greaseproof paper in it. The oven's been preheating at 170°C, which is around 340-ish. So I'm gonna do 4.5 cups of oats, 370 grams. These are jumbo rolled oats. In my bowl here, I've got various chopped nuts, 130 grams. There is a mixture of hazelnuts, pecans, and macadamia nuts. I'm gonna finish up this bag of pumpkin seeds, 1.5 tablespoons or so. And then I'll use some of this omega seed mix. Let's do 6. So I'm gonna start with 1.5 cups of the applesauce. I'm gonna add 1/2 teaspoon or so of ground cinnamon and some maple syrup. I'm using the maple syrup for flavour more than sweetness because the applesauce is already sweet. In fact, I'm going to do the maple syrup directly onto the oats because I might not add all of the applesauce. That's working super well, isn't it? Good grief. And then I'll do 4 of the maple syrup. Give that a loose mix. really badly combined applesauce and cinnamon. Start with like 2/3 of the applesauce. I don't want to put it all in one go in case it doesn't need that much, because then I'll have to add more oat. Well, let's just do it all. My hope is that the applesauce will behave in the same way that the protein shake has in the past, that it will make the oats have a bit of crispness to them. Dump the mixture into my pan, spread it out in the pan. I'm going to put this in the oven. Once the granola is out of the oven, I'm going to add in some dried cranberries and some goji berries. You might also see these as wolfberries. I'm going to mix up a little dish of dust, tasty dust, just to roll the cookies in. Ground cinnamon, cocoa powder, hot chocolate powder. If you're in the UK, the Cadbury's one is accidentally vegan. I'll do a tablespoon of cocoa. Same of the hot chocolate powder, with a teaspoon of the cinnamon. I know chocolate isn't a typical pumpkin spice associated flavour, but our cookies are choice. Got my tray with some silicone that I'll set up at the side. So I'm just taking some on the spoon and then knocking it onto my thumb and then just working it between my palms. The cookies need to bake 12 to 14 minutes until slightly firm to the touch. So I'm going to get that in and whip out the granola so that can have its first stir. Here's the granola. It's getting more colour on than I predicted it would at this point. So I'm going to go through, break it up. This is now going to go underneath the cookies, so I don't think it will get quite as much colour as it did just then. I'll keep on with my dusty balls and also stirring the granola. I've set separate timers. If the granola needs more than an hour, then I think I should be able to get all of the cookies done at the same time. It just depends on how long the granola needs to go crisp. The cookies and the granola are both done. There's the cookies. And then here is the granola. When the first tray of cookies had only a couple minutes left, I had a look through the window and I could see what the spread was, and I could see there was huge gaps in between each. So on the second sheet, I then just scrunched them tighter together and managed to get the whole lot on the second sheet. The granola's in the oven total 110 minutes. My feeling is because it was on the bottom shelf and the cookies were on top, the steam was hitting the cookies and then bouncing back into the pan. So if the granola is the only thing in the oven, I don't think it'll take anywhere near that long. I did the fruit in. It was 83 grams of fruit, which is about half a cup or so. And I chopped down the cranberries and goji berries and then just stirred them in. I tasted it after I'd taken out the oven. And although there was a sweetness there, I started wishing I'd put a bit more maple syrup in, but then remembered I've got this maple syrup sugar that I've had in the cupboard several years out of date, but it's sugar, so it's fine. I've just Googled to see how it's made, and apparently you just boil maple syrup until you're left with just a dry granule. If you don't happen to have this, just add in more maple syrup, unless you don't mind it not so sweet. I would maybe do an extra 4 tablespoons or add some brown sugar maybe, that might be quite nice. We'll now move on to making the salted caramel popcorn, because that needs an hour in the oven. So I think once that's in the oven, then I can come back and do the granola clusters. I found a recipe for caramel popcorn on itdoesn'ttastelikechicken.com. I'll link to that in the description. We make the caramel on the stove and then mix it with the popped popcorn and then chuck it in the oven. So the oven is at 95 degrees now, which is around 200 Fahrenheit. I popped the popcorn earlier. That was 1/3 of a cup of kernels, 68 grams on my measure. I did my popcorn in the microwave for the first time. I bought the microwave bags that you do, but I've not done it, you know, in the microwave DIY kind of thing. So I've got some brown paper bags, like little lunch sack type things. Because my bags were quite small, I did half of the kernels at a time, just so I wasn't overwhelming the bags. Put the kernels in a bowl and poured over a tiny bit of sunflower oil, maybe half a teaspoon, something like that. Stirred it through, put half in the bag, set the microwave for 5 minutes, and then listened quite carefully. Mine is an 850 watt microwave, so it took maybe 90 seconds for them to start popping. And then it was kind of sporadic, and then all of a sudden it got more frequent. And then once like 5 seconds go by and you don't really hear any popping, that's the time to take it out. With the bags, I folded the top over like 3 times just to make sure there was no pop and then the thing fly open. Once they were done, I took the bag, shook it to get any unpopped kernels to fall to the bottom. I did the popcorn like 6 hours ago. I'm just debating if there's any value in putting it in the oven for a couple of minutes, because it has gone a tiny bit stale. No, let's not bother, because it's just another thing I have to pay attention to. I've multiplied the original recipe by 1.5, just so I have lots of caramel on the popcorn. 85 grams of vegan butter. I'm going to use the butter that went wrong from making the cookies. Then I need 165 grams of light brown sugar. That's going to give a really nice bit of flavour. The original recipe uses agave nectar. I'm going to use golden syrup. I guess you could use corn syrup as well. I'm not 100% sure why you use the syrup, and it doesn't say in the recipe notes. Perhaps to stop it crystallising. I'm going to do a half teaspoon of salt. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough. And then we need some cream of tartar. Apparently this is going to make the caramel really smooth. If you haven't got it, you can make it without, but it's a good thing to have in the cupboard. Quarter teaspoon of that. Put that in. So we're going to heat it up, and we need it to boil, but we need to be careful it doesn't burn. Once it comes to the boil, we're adding some baking soda. This was a quarter of a teaspoon and an eighth of a teaspoon. I'm going to taste it, or attempt to, just to see if the salt level is okay. I just want to do that before it gets much hotter. I'm going to do another quarter teaspoon. It's looking a tad grainy, isn't it? I'm hoping as it heats that will resolve. And once it boils, I need to let it boil for another 2 minutes. Okay, so that's at a boil. So I've just set my timer for a minute, and then I'm going to take it off the heat, stir in the baking soda. I'm going to get the baking soda in. And the baking soda is going to give it lots of little air holes, so then it forms a very thin, light coating on the popcorn. And then onto the popcorn. Give it a stir through. And the recipe says don't worry if each piece of popcorn's not fully covered, because we're going to stir it a couple of times as it's in the oven. I'm going to try and get it into an even layer, and then I'll slide that into the oven. I'm going to crack on with the granola cluster nest things. I'm going to melt the chocolate in a bowl over a pan of water, a bain-marie. So I'm just going to put like an inch of water at the bottom. The reason for doing the chocolate on the stove is I'm going to put the granola into the melted chocolate and then take bits out and shape the little clusters. I think it'd be better to keep everything hot. Got a 100-gram bar of dark chocolate, and then I've got some semi-sweet chocolate chips. Costco chocolate chips are accidentally vegan. Win. I've taken 1 cup of chocolate chips and weighed it. That's 200 grams, well, 195 to be precise. Cup and a half of chocolate chips, 300 grams. So we'll get that on the heat. Here's the granola. So you can hear how lovely and crunchy it is. I've got a flat baking sheet. Got about a tablespoon or so of desiccated coconut. I toasted it off in the pan just to get a tiny bit of colour, bring out the flavour a bit more. This is the praline cream that's left over from when I did the chocolate stout cake. I'll link to that in the description. It's separated, so I'm just going to mix it back together. This is effectively a nut butter. I made hazelnut praline and then blitzed it down into a paste. The chocolate's taking ages to melt, so I've just put more water in to bring the level higher. So I'm just going to try and get the uncoated pieces a little bit more coated. It does harden quite quickly though, so you don't want it out the oven too long. I'm thinking maybe 3 big spoonfuls of the granola. So I'll do 1, mix it, 2, 3, another half I think, tablespoon or so of the mixture. I'm gonna try and keep it into like a little pile. This one I will do some coconut. I just want to make like a little crater. I got 14 of the little clusters. I did 4 plain, 4 coconut and 6 praline. Just taking the popcorn out for another stir. And then it needs the final 20. Oh, it smells so good. It smells like serotonin. Oh, yes. They need a final 20 minutes in the oven. Once it's completely cool, I'll then break it apart as much as I need to. And then we'll come back and we'll do some eating. It's time to eat our trio of treaties. Yes. It smells so good in here today. So I'm beyond ready for eating. Once the popcorn had its final 20 minutes, I just left everything in the paper. The kitchen was really hot and humid, so I thought I'm going to put it in a different room where I've not had the heating on, because it was nice and cold in there. And I put the chocolates in there as well. So everything has chilled down quite nicely in around 45 minutes, something like that. It's now 10:15. Can't remember what time I said it was. I'm so tired. I'm gonna go spice cookie first, I think. Ooh, The level of spice is perfect. I was a bit worried I'd put too much in. Can't remember how much I did. 2 teaspoons, 1.5. Perfect. The texture and the flavour reminds me of a Dutch cookie. Exactly that kind of shape, but then they're covered in a really thin layer of white icing. Delicious. You kind of bite through and you've got a bit of crispness from the icing on there, and then you've got that soft texture on the cookie. Do another one. I scarfed it before showing you inside. It's got a very open structure. I'll definitely make them again, and I think the almonds in there, I don't know if that's contributing to that nice soft texture, but definitely worth doing. And I think instead of doing that dusting on the outside, I might put some icing on there. Go for one of the little granola clusters. This is gonna get messy. Yeah, that's yummy. Because the granola's not super sugary, it's not overwhelmingly sweet in there with the praline and the chocolate, and there's a nice bit of crunch in there as well. The texture inside looks very similar to the outside, except not as shiny. And the bit I've secretly been waiting for, the popcorn. I'm excited. It's just buttery, sugary, slightly toasted deliciousness. And because there's that bit of salt in there, if you're in the UK, it stops it being too butterkiss-like, like the really sugary one. Like, it just has that little something. With the popcorn, it might be fun to play with the kind of sweet, salty thing. I'm putting things like dry roasted peanuts maybe, or just salty peanuts, or bits of pretzel sticks, that kind of thing. If you're thinking you might want to do something like this for giving to trick-or-treaters at Halloween, or even birthday and Christmas presents throughout the year, or whatever holidays you celebrate. I've done a few different sweet type things. I did the chocolate salami, I've made truffles. I'll put links to anything I think of down in the description, and then you could do like a little selection box. The homemade gifts are always great, aren't they? Especially when it's food. Doing all three of these, well technically four because I made the granola as well, it's a lot of work, and I am now in a stupendous amount of pain. All of my joints are throbbing, but in isolation, each one, minimal amounts of work for maximum amount of flavour. Once I've broken down and put everything away, finally, for the evening, I'm going to grab myself a cheeky little scotch, I think, and gnaw on some snacks. So all that's left for me to do is say a great big hello and thank you to my supporters over on Patreon. Having that little community of patrons not only gives me a little bit of income to buy ingredients and pay for the associated costs of being a YouTuber, but it also provides a really nice bit of emotional support and, you know, keeps things G'ing along when life gets in the way. If you want to join up, I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the description for you. If you'd like lots more plant-based recipes coming your way, I've got savoury, sweet and everywhere in between. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tap the bell icon, you'll get an alert as soon as I publish a new one. While you're waiting for the next one, have a look at this.